The Church of England Apology for Slavery. Missionaries Sinned by Imposing Hymns. Narrated by Ras Kefem, Kef Media Production. The Church of England made an apology to Africans in 2006 for the enslavement of their ancestors. How many people of African descent in the world are in this audience are conscious or aware of this historical fact? The focus of this presentation is on one small quote from the Apology to Africans by the Church. I read this quote over a decade ago in my research for my book, Deception in the Name of the Lord, and it has been a disturbing thought since then, when taken in the full context of the Christian religion, slavery, and colonialization. The apology came after Archbishop Rowan Williams was criticized for saying that missionaries sinned by imposing hymns, ancient and modern, on places such as Africa. This hymn quote from the Church brings to mind psychological techniques in classical conditioning used by Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov in his dog and bell experiment in 1897, where dogs began to salivate when stimulated with the sound of the bell as a conditioned response. In the study of digestion, Pavlov observed that the experimental dogs salivated when fed red meat. It also brings to mind the definition of the Stockholm Syndrome. It refers to the bond that can develop between hostages and their captors in hostage-taking and kidnapping situations. That has been the situation for Africans under colonial oppression for centuries. Another example of this psychological conditioning is mentioned in a speech by Malcolm X with the title, Malcolm Tells the Parable of House Negro.
To understand this, you have to go back to what young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro. Back during slavery, there was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food, what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick.
Africans were subjected to religious games of subliminal seduction through rituals of worship. They were also subjected to classical conditioning techniques with repetitious seductive hymns as Pavlovian bells, crude brainwashing to foster submission and obedience in the name of God and crown, government. The church and crown were partners in the crime of human trafficking. United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization recognized slavery as a crime against humanity. After imposing hymns on Africans over the world for centuries, the church is now saying, after the fact, we sinned. We are sinful, meaning wicked or evil. Yet, because of this imposition of those hymns, Africans are conditioned into still finding value in these sinful hymns. How do we reverse this tragedy? This is a crime the church participated in and profited well from. How is it possible for the UN to have a higher standard of morality, humanity, than an omniscient God and a holy church said to be under his divine guidance? Let's make this clear. Missionaries sinned by imposing hymns. In no uncertain term is an admission that the vast catalogue of Protestant hymns, descendants of Africans of British colonial heritage, sing today were the result of a sinful act. They were imposed. Imposed by whom? The Church of England, as a church of the state with the crown, queen or king as supreme governor. The question still hanging. What was so sinful about songs we learned from the church that was so bad, wicked, that the church itself had to be apologizing for? And isn't it ironic that the church and the whole institution of the clergy, with its missionary agencies, while saying you are sin-filled and that your souls must be saved from sin, has been the ones teaching those sinful hymns to you and your children for generations? Interestingly, they did not give a list of the sinful hymns specifically, unless we should consider the whole catalogue of hymns from the Church of England hymn book to be all sinful. Britannica defined sinful as wrong according to religious or moral law, very bad or wicked. Let us now look at a few hymns that carries some negative hidden or sublimated traits that were imposed associated with the British colonial slave trade, which led to the imposition of Christianity on British subjects internationally. How did Amazing Grace become a black gospel song? Amazing Grace is said to be the most popular, most famous of all hymns among the Protestant churches. It was sung by President Obama in 2015. He was inspired to sing Amazing Grace at the funeral service of Reverend Clementa Pickney.
Sing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Arguably, the best known Christian hymn is Amazing Grace. Its text, a poem penned in 1772 by John Newton, describes the joy and peace of a soul uplifted from despair to salvation through the gift of grace. In an essay, Newton said, "I hope it will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me, that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders." The captain of a slave ship, after retiring from active seafaring, he continued to invest in the slave trade. Years after experiencing a conversion to Christianity, he was ordained as a Church of England cleric and served as parish priest for 2 decades and wrote hymns. John Newton was a man that despicably sold other human beings. In the slave trade, as he states in the hymn, he was a wretch, but God found him. He was saved by God's amazing grace. On one hand, John Newton's contrition is express remorse for being wretched in his role as a slave trader, is betrayed by the fact that the church he belonged to is now saying they sinned when they impose hymns on Africans. Hymns like the one he wrote about being saved from sin. Amazing grace. These hymns were principal tools in the Anglicans' arsenal of instruments used to pacify slaves, conditioning their minds to love and empathize with those who are their captors, oppressors, allowing state church-sponsored slavery with blind faith. John Newton was ordained in the Church of England as a clergyman in 1764. 243 years later, the Church of England hymnal, including John Newton's hymn, Amazing Grace, are now suspect as sinful hymns imposed by missionaries of the church in partnership with the colonial objectives of the British Empire. Another hymn that carries suspicious elements was mentioned in the book From Superman to Man by J.A. Rogers, Religion and the Negro, about the author. Quote, "One of the loudest voices challenging the notions of black inferiority and the lack of credible history surrounding the contributions of people of African descent was that of Joel Augustus Rogers, born on September the 6th, 1883, in Negril, Jamaica. The Jamaican American author, journalist, and historian was one of 11 children born to a minister and school teacher." Quote from the Amsterdam News. A quote from the book. "The slogan of the Negro devotee is, 'Take the world, but give me Jesus,' and the white man strikes an eager bargain with him." This reference from Superman to Man is Exhibit A as evidence for missionaries sinned by imposing hymns. "You can have the whole world, but give me Jesus" was the formula for converting Africans from the richest continent in the world into the continent with the poorest people. The African psyche is conditioned to ignore their rich cultural wealth of natural resources for a promised payment waiting in the sky, with no cares for material or things of this world. The original title of this hymn was, "Well, take the world, but give me Jesus." It was written by Fanny Crosby and published in 1879. These hymns, promoted by the Church of England, became the instruments used in concert with a colonial British policy to enrich England's economy and impoverish Africa and Africans in all the British colonies or Commonwealth around the world. The apology to descendants of this crime against humanity alive today speaks to the fact that, as emotionally captivating and inspiring these hymns may be, there is a sublimated, a hidden intent woven in the fabric of their lyrical construct, designed to be deceptively sinful. That evidence is enveloped in the apology from God's emissaries and their sacred blunder. Missionary sins by imposing hymns, ancient and modern, on places such as Africa. You must also keep in mind that the hymns often referred to as black gospel songs are originally written by Europeans, reflecting their religious traditions, their cultural identity, where whiteness holds premium value and blackness is symbolically negative. Christianity was woven from this cultural fabric, hence a hymn to emphasize all those delusions about race now manifested. Whiter Than Snow is an article by Hayes A. John, which begins with this quote: "Conceived and born in sin, we are blacker than coal." The hymn Whiter Than Snow was written by James Nicholson, 1828-1826. He was born in Ireland and emigrated to the United States around age 25. The refrain goes, "Whiter than snow, yes, whiter than snow. Now wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Lord Jesus, let nothing unholy remain. Apply thy own blood and extract every stain. To get this blessed cleansing, I all things forego. Now wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." From whiter than snow, we now go to what seems to be one of the most disturbing move on the part of the Church of England in our modern era. As reported by the New York Times in a publication on August 7, 2007, Bob Marley and Peter Tosh songs are now officially in the Church of England's hymnal. The headline reads, "Reggae Songs in Anglican Hymnal" by New York Times. Quote, "Songs by the reggae greats Bob Marley and Peter Tosh, who practice Rastafarianism, will appear in new Anglican church hymnals in Jamaica," the Associated Press reported. Church leaders preparing a new collection of hymns said Marley's One Love and Touch Psalms 27 will be the first reggae tunes to appear besides traditional worship music on the islands where reggae was born. So, why the desperation on the part of the church to include Bob Marley and Peter Tosh to a catalogue of songs that has now been confirmed by the highest officials of the church, the Archbishop, to be sinful hymns imposed by missionaries? In the tradition of Jamaica society, in relationship to Rasta culture, the church regards them as unbelievers, sinners who need to repent and accept Jesus Christ. Yet, according to the Church of England newspaper, speaking to the Jamaica Observer on August the 1st, 07, Canon Ernil Gordon of Kingston said, the inclusion of the two reggae songs in the hymnal was part of the church's move to make it culturally relevant. In other words,
Stone that the builder refused will always be the head cornerstone. Sing it, brother. Stone that the builder refused.
the stone the builders refuse is now chosen as the stone for making the church relevant after 4 years of partnership with the British colonial slaveocracy policy. Slaveocracy, defined, a society primarily ruled by a class of slaveholders. The adoption of Bob Marley and Peter Tosh songs to the church hymnal is a damning rebuke of the church, implying desperation. To show the distance in difference between Bob and Peter's perception of the church. Remember, it was Bob Marley who wrote one of the most incendiary comments that resulted in government concerns when he said in Talking Blues that I feel like bombing a church. Now that I know that the preacher is lying. He also accused the system of building church and university, deceiving the people continually. Peter Tosh talked about church and state hypocritical system. Both Bob and Peter were visionaries who saw what was happening way above the curve in their denunciation of church and state as a hypocritical system. Note that the Anglican Church adopted Peter Tosh and Bob Marley songs in 2007. They made the apology for slavery in 2006. 1 year after adopting Bob and Peter's songs. Suspicious, you would say. This is a draw bad card moment for this sacred institution that, for some strange reason, chose to add songs from the most popular, secular, celebrated international Rasta musicians who the church earlier in their history shunned.
Rasta said to people, Babylon, you don't know what to say. Rasta said to people, Babylon, you don't know what you're doing. King Rasta come now soon.
Now, in its quest to survive, to find relevance, the church reaches out to those once irrelevant, those who sing about the real experiences of life without sophistry or the superficiality of hoping for a pie in the sky. Peter Tosh gave a short summary on the subject of sinful hymns when he said, I was taught that Jesus, the Son of God, was a white man, and hearing black people singing, Lord, wash me and I will be whiter than snow, made me sick. Peter Tosh, Steppin' Razor, Red X.